Hello, my friends, and welcome to Immersive History. Picture a morning so perfect it seems blessed by the gods themselves. Dawns clear and bright across the Bay of Naples, where the most prosperous corner of the Roman Empire awakens to another day of unimaginable luxury and abundance. The sun rises behind Mount Vesuvius, painting the mountain's green slopes in golden light that illuminates vineyards heavy with grapes destined for the finest Roman tables. This is Pompeii at its zenith, a city of 20,000 souls living at the very peak of human civilization. Streets paved with volcanic stone echo with the sounds of commerce in a dozen languages. Magnificent villas showcase art treasures from across the known world. Public fountains flow with crystal clear mountain water delivered through engineering marvels that span hundreds of miles. Citizens wake in comfortable homes to bread fresh from ovens that have burned through the night, preparing to spend their day in pursuits that would seem impossibly sophisticated to any previous generation in human history. Yet beneath this paradise, forces beyond human comprehension are stirring. In 18 hours, this scene of peace and prosperity will be transformed into humanity's most perfectly preserved disaster, a catastrophe that will give residents time to escape, but also time to make the fatal mistake of believing they could outlast what was coming. The same mountain that has blessed this region with the richest soil in Italy is preparing to demonstrate that nature's gifts always come with hidden costs. Our journey will take us through those crucial hours through the eyes of someone who lived through them, experiencing how paradise became hell, how routine became a race against time, and how the most advanced urban civilization of the ancient world discovered that even with warning signs, human psychology struggles to grasp threats that fall completely outside previous experience. If you enjoyed this exploration of the past, I'd be grateful if you'd show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps keep these historical journeys alive. Now let us walk the bustling streets of Pompeii on the eve of disaster, where tens of thousands of people shaped a thriving city through ingenuity, trade, and the rhythms of everyday life. Today you will acquire the ancient knowledge and skills of a Roman engineer and become Marcus, a man responsible for maintaining the aqueduct systems that bring fresh mountain water to the thriving cities around Vesuvius. Your work takes you from the elegant resort town of Herculaneum to the bustling centre of Pompeii and across the fertile countryside that feeds both. Each journey reminds you how much this region depends on water and how fragile its prosperity would become without it. This prosperity, sustained by the lifeblood of fresh water, finds its fullest expression in Pompeii. The city serves as the commercial heart of Campania, connecting Rome with Greek colonies throughout southern Italy and coordinating trade networks that span the Mediterranean. Ships arrive daily at the Sarno River port carrying Egyptian grain, Greek wine, Spanish olive oil, Syrian glass, Indian spices, and Chinese silk, luxury goods that find eager buyers among the region's wealthy residents. The scale of this commerce staggers visitors from smaller cities. Pompeii's markets handle transactions involving sums that exceed the annual budgets of entire provinces, while its warehouses store goods worth more than many kings' treasures. The city's infrastructure reinforces this impression of permanence and sophistication. The aqueduct system you maintain delivers 1,000 gallons of fresh water daily to private homes, fountains, and elaborate bathhouses. Streets follow a precise grid with raised sidewalks and ingenious drainage channels that handle the region's seasonal rains. About 20,000 residents live in conditions ranging from palatial luxury to modest comfort, with even ordinary families enjoying amenities like kitchens with running water, indoor plumbing, and access to public baths that rival modern spas in their sophistication. This extraordinary wealth rests on both international trade and agricultural abundance that seems almost miraculous. Vesuvius's volcanic soil yields grapes and olives of exceptional quality that are exported across the empire, while the city's artisans fill hundreds of workshops, from bakeries that produce a dozen varieties of bread to fulleries that clean and dye textiles using techniques perfected over centuries. Metalworking shops create everything from delicate jewellery to sturdy tools, while thermopolia serve as ancient fast food restaurants where busy citizens can purchase hot meals prepared by professional cooks. The social structure of this prosperity creates a complex hierarchy that nonetheless offers remarkable opportunities for advancement. At the top stand wealthy landowners and merchants who fund temple construction and sponsor gladiatorial games. Below them thrives a substantial middle class of craftsmen, shop owners, and professionals like yourself who enjoy comfortable lives through their skills and industry. Even the working poor and the many slaves often live better here than free citizens in less prosperous regions, demonstrating how Roman urban civilization has achieved unprecedented standards of living for large populations. Your morning routine begins well before dawn in your comfortable two-story house built around a central courtyard. The atrium features a shallow pool that catches rainwater while providing cooling through evaporation, surrounded by painted columns that support upper floors where your family sleeps. Morning light filtering through the compluvium, the rectangular opening in the roof, illuminates frescoes depicting mythological scenes that demonstrate your family's social position. The morning meal reflects both Roman traditions and the international influences that characterize Pompeii's cosmopolitan culture. Bread forms the foundation, not coarse dark loaves that sustain the poor, but fine white bread made from carefully sifted flour and baked by professionals whose skills represent generations of accumulated knowledge. With this, you eat cheese from local goats fed on mountain herbs, honey imported from Greek islands, preserved olives from Spanish groves selected for their exceptional flavour, and seasonal fruit from your garden or nearby farms that benefit from the region's perfect growing conditions. Your daily walk to the aqueduct maintenance office provides constant reminders of Pompeii's extraordinary urban sophistication. The streets follow a precise grid pattern established during the city's early development, with raised sidewalks that protect pedestrians from wheeled traffic while facilitating drainage during occasional heavy rains. Stepping stones placed at regular intervals allow people to cross streets without stepping into water or mud, while also serving as traffic controls that prevent carts from moving dangerously fast through crowded areas. The buildings you pass represent architectural achievement that combines practical functionality with aesthetic beauty, designed to make daily life a visual pleasure. Private homes range from modest single-story structures to elaborate multi-story mansions, but even humble dwellings include features like indoor plumbing, painted walls depicting scenes from mythology or nature, and mosaic floors created by skilled artisans using techniques that produce artworks meant to last for centuries. The poorest families in Pompeii enjoy living conditions that would be envied by aristocrats in less developed regions of the empire. Commercial establishments display their goods through street-facing windows and doorways that create continuous marketplaces extending throughout the urban area. Bakeries announce themselves through aromas that can be detected from blocks away, while painted signs advertise specialties. Military bread for soldiers and workers, luxury loaves for special occasions, dietary breads for people with particular health needs. The variety demonstrates how Roman commercial culture has developed to serve every possible consumer preference and economic level. Wine shops offer selections from throughout the empire, with detailed labels describing origins, vintages, and recommended pairings that reflect sophisticated understanding of viticulture and consumer preferences. Textile workshops display fabrics, showcasing the full range of materials available to Roman consumers. Local wool, dyed in colours extracted from plants and minerals throughout the Mediterranean, Egyptian linen, processed to create materials softer than silk, and leather goods manufactured using advanced tanning techniques. The variety and quality available to ordinary residents would seem miraculous to people from earlier periods or less developed regions. The social dynamics visible on morning streets reveal the complex hierarchies that structure Roman society, while also demonstrating the genuine opportunities for advancement that imperial prosperity creates. Well-dressed citizens conducting business wear togas that indicate their social status through subtle details of cut, material, and decoration that trained observers can read like heraldic symbols. Freedmen managing shops and workshops display their success through jewelry, fine clothing, and the confident bearing that comes from achieving security and respect through their own efforts and abilities. Slaves accompanying masters or running errands demonstrate both the economic importance of unfree labour and the diverse backgrounds that slavery encompasses in Roman society. Some are clearly recent captives from frontier wars, identifiable by facial tattoos, distinctive clothing styles, or linguistic patterns from distant provinces. Others have been born into slavery but received educations that make them valuable as secretaries, tutors, or skilled craftsmen whose expertise commands respect, even from free citizens who may depend on their knowledge and abilities. The street scenes also showcase the international character that makes Pompeii unique among Roman cities and demonstrates the empire's success in integrating diverse populations. Merchants from Alexandria discuss grain prices with local traders, while their assistants unload ships carrying goods that have travelled thousands of miles. Syrian glassworkers demonstrate techniques that produce vessels so delicate they seem to capture and hold light itself. Germanic metalworkers offer weapons and tools whose quality reflects tribal traditions successfully adapted to meet Roman military and civilian needs. Your responsibilities as aqueduct engineer require you to report regularly to a designated workspace within Pompeii's basilica, where municipal officials coordinate the city's essential services. The chamber assigned for waterworks administration occupies a corner of the building's upper level, with high ceilings that provide good ventilation and large windows that maximize natural light needed for detailed calculations and measurements. Here you maintain the records essential for coordinating water distribution throughout the region. Wax tablets documenting flow rates at major distribution points, papyrus scrolls recording maintenance performed on critical sections, and detailed notes about seasonal variations in spring output accumulated over years of careful observation. Wooden chests protect surveying instruments and measuring devices from humidity, while stone shelves hold samples of pipe materials and junction components that enable repairs to complex distribution networks. But this morning, your routine review of recent observations will reveal patterns that challenge everything you thought you understood about the region's underground stability. For weeks, you've been documenting troubling changes in the water systems you maintain. Springs that have flowed steadily for generations now produce water with odd mineral content and sulfur tastes that make it barely usable, while flow rates have dropped significantly across multiple aqueduct sections, forcing rationing that affects daily life throughout the region. Most disturbing, some water sources now run uncomfortably hot, requiring cooling procedures before safe use, while new ground fissures emit sulfurous gases that make inspection work increasingly dangerous. Your engineering mind has been connecting these observations into a pattern that points toward a conclusion almost too terrifying to contemplate. Something massive is stirring beneath Vesuvius. The technical data tells an increasingly alarming story about underground conditions. Temperature measurements show systematic increases, indicating heat sources far more powerful than normal geothermal activity, while chemical analysis reveals mineral concentration, suggesting contact between water and materials normally found only deep within the Earth's crust. Cross-referencing current observations with historical records, documenting normal system performance over decades, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Underground pressures are building throughout the region, creating geological instability on a scale beyond anything in recorded experience. But in a world where volcanic processes are poorly understood and the mountain has been quiet for centuries, your concerns seem like excessive worries of an overly cautious technician rather than warnings of approaching catastrophe. As you prepare for your routine inspection of mountain springs, the ride through countryside that normally fills you with pride in Roman agricultural achievement now carries undercurrents of anxiety. The villas you pass represent accumulated wealth, spanning generations of families who have transformed this region into a showcase of Roman prosperity. The villa of the Papyri, belonging to Caesar's father-in-law, sprawls across landscape grounds that include private libraries containing thousands of scrolls, art galleries displaying masterpieces from throughout the Greek world, and botanical gardens showcasing specimens collected from every corner of the known world. But it's the agricultural landscape that truly demonstrates why wealthy Romans compete for property near this apparently benevolent mountain. Vesuvius's volcanic soil yields crops of extraordinary quality and quantity, supporting agricultural productivity that feeds local populations while providing surplus for export throughout the Mediterranean. Terraced vineyards climbing the mountain slopes produce wines whose reputation extends to Rome itself, commanding premium prices and generating fortunes for their owners. Olive groves occupying middle elevations yield oil that commands the highest prices in markets throughout the empire, while grain fields in fertile plains produce harvests that exceed yields in other regions by margins that seem almost miraculous. This agricultural wealth supports not only farmers directly involved in production, but entire networks of merchants, transporters, processors and retailers whose livelihoods depend on the mountain's continuing beneficence. As you climb higher on Vesuvius's slopes, however, evidence of underground changes becomes impossible to ignore. Springs that engineering records show have flowed consistently for over a century are completely dry, their marble-lined collection basins containing only stagnant puddles of discoloured water that smell of sulphur and dissolved minerals usually found only in deep mining operations. Other sources continue flowing but produce water so heavily laden with dissolved minerals that it leaves coloured stains on everything it touches, creating rainbow patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't so ominous. The chemical composition indicates contact between water and rock formations normally found far below the surface, suggesting that underground pressure changes are forcing deep materials upward through cracks and fissures. Most disturbing are new fissures in solid rock that have appeared over recent weeks, cracks extending for dozens of yards that emit gases hot enough to make air shimmer, while producing sounds suggesting enormous pressures seeking release from deep within the mountain. When you approach these openings, the heat and chemical smells become overwhelming, forcing retreat while covering nose and mouth to avoid breathing vapours that burn the throat and make eyes water. At the highest accessible point on the mountain, around 10 o'clock, on what will prove to be the last normal morning in this region's history, you witness something that transforms professional concern into personal terror. The ground begins vibrating with continuous tremors, unlike any earthquake experienced during years of working throughout this seismically active region. The vibrations have a rhythmic quality, suggesting enormous mechanical processes operating far below the surface, like the heartbeat of some gigantic creature stirring to life within the earth itself. Placing your ear to the ground, a technique learned from military engineers who used it to detect enemy tunneling, you hear sounds from within the mountain that defy description. Distant rumblings, grinding noises, and what sound almost like voices moaning in harmony create an acoustic landscape that speaks of forces beyond human comprehension preparing for release. But it's what happens next that transforms every previous concern into immediate terror. A thin column of vapour that has been rising from Vesuvius's crater since dawn suddenly expands dramatically, transforming from barely visible wisp into dense, towering column that rises straight up from the mountain's peak with incredible speed. The column climbs to heights that seem impossible, higher than any cloud formation ever observed, reaching altitudes where normal atmospheric phenomena never occur. Within minutes, the formation extends so far upward that its top disappears from view, while its base expands to cover the entire crater area. Material being ejected glitters in morning sunlight, like particles of gold and silver mixed with darker fragments, suggesting the mountain is tearing itself apart from within. This is the moment, around midday on August 24th, when theoretical geological processes become immediate mortal danger, when the impossible becomes inevitable. The sound accompanying this visual transformation defies every category of noise in human experience. Simultaneously, a roar, shriek, rumble and crash, the voice of a mountain destroying itself from within. Within minutes, the perfect morning sky begins darkening as the eruption column expands with terrifying speed, blocking the sun and creating artificial twilight that transforms familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. Temperature begins dropping as sunlight disappears, while air itself becomes difficult to breathe due to fine particles that make every inhalation burn the throat and create metallic tastes, indicating chemical contamination. The geological processes unfolding operate according to physical laws that Roman science barely understands. The magma chamber beneath Vesuvius, pressurized by gases dissolved in molten rock, heated to temperatures exceeding any normal experience, has reached conditions where overlying rock formations can no longer contain internal pressures. The initial explosion launches a mixture of pulverized rock, volcanic glass, and superheated gases into the stratosphere at velocities approaching the speed of sound. Racing down the mountain toward Pompeii, you encounter others witnessing the spectacle, with reactions demonstrating the full range of human responses to unprecedented crisis. Some farmers, their experience with natural signs making them quicker to recognize danger, are already loading carts with essential possessions for immediate evacuation. Others stand in fields pointing at the column and discussing it with detached curiosity, their voices carrying no urgency, despite obviously abnormal conditions developing overhead. A few wealthy villa owners are visible on terraces, viewing the eruption as spectacular entertainment provided by nature for their amusement. Their reactions reflect psychological distance that luxury creates from natural forces. When daily life is insulated by wealth from direct environmental contact, even dangerous phenomena can seem like aesthetic experiences rather than immediate threats requiring practical response. Reaching Pompeii around 1 o'clock, you find the city beginning to react to ominous changes visible from any elevated position, but without urgency the situation demands. The eruption column now dominates the northern sky like a towering tree of smoke and ash, reaching higher than any mountain, while its spreading canopy begins casting shadows that turn bright afternoon into unnatural twilight. The forum fills with crowds discussing the spectacle and debating its significance with confident analysis Romans habitually apply to all phenomena, whether familiar or unprecedented. Conversations reflect limited understanding of volcanic processes available in the ancient world, where even educated individuals possess only theoretical knowledge, divorced from practical experience with such events. Some argue the column indicates major fires on mountain slopes. Perhaps lightning has ignited forests, or underground coal deposits have somehow caught fire. Others suggest divine origins, proposing the spectacle represents manifestation of displeasure from gods requiring appeasement through appropriate sacrifices. A few, with pretensions to natural philosophy, propose explanations based on Greek theories about underground fires and winds causing geological phenomena. Most tellingly, the city's normal activities continue largely unchanged, despite obviously abnormal conditions developing overhead. Markets remain open with vendors calling their wares in voices competing with distant rumbling from Vesuvius. Children play in streets while mothers shop for dinner. Gladiator schools continue training sessions. The bars operate normally for citizens discussing unusual atmospheric conditions with the same detached interest they might apply to foreign political developments. Your attempts to warn city officials meet with reactions demonstrating both limitations of human decision-making under uncertainty and institutional constraints preventing rapid response to unprecedented situations. The magistrates listen to your technical presentation with polite attention, but their responses reveal barriers preventing effective emergency response when normal procedures prove inadequate. Magistrate explains the practical challenges. Where would 20,000 displaced people be housed? How would transportation be coordinated for families, elderly residents, and people with special needs? What about protecting property from looters? The practical difficulties seem insurmountable compared to uncertain benefits, based on warning signs that remain theoretical to those lacking technical expertise. Moreover, social and economic consequences of unnecessary evacuation could prove devastating. Pompeii serves as commercial centre for the entire region, coordinating trade networks, affecting economic activity throughout southern Italy. Shutting down these systems based on uncertain threat assessment could cause months-long disruptions, creating secondary disasters exceeding any natural damage. Standing in the magistrate's office as afternoon shadows deepen unnaturally due to volcanic debris blocking sunlight, you feel clarity settle over your thinking. Institutional channels have failed. Official response will come too late, if at all. Survival now depends on individual initiative rather than collective action. Around 2 o'clock, the situation escalates from theoretical danger to immediate physical threat as the first tangible evidence of volcanic violence begins falling from the eruption column. Small pumice stones, light and porous, start dropping throughout Pompeii with increasing frequency and intensity, transforming abstract geological processes into concrete reality that no one can ignore. Initially, these stone fragments seem more curious than threatening, warm to the touch and strange in texture, but individually small enough to be brushed off clothing and not immediately dangerous to people remaining indoors. Citizens emerge from buildings to examine the unusual precipitation, collecting samples and speculating about origins with intellectual curiosity that characterizes educated Romans confronting novel phenomena. The Pumice stones tell complex stories about violence occurring within Vesuvius. These fragments represent molten rock shattered by explosive decompression when magma containing dissolved gases suddenly reaches the surface, and those gases expand with tremendous force as pressure drops to atmospheric levels. The stone's porous texture results from gas bubbles, trapped and frozen when molten material cooled rapidly during flight through the atmosphere. But alongside the pumice, a more spectacular phenomenon begins, what witnesses describe as rain of fire. Tiny fragments of molten volcanic material, heated to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, fall from the eruption column while still glowing with internal heat, visible even in daylight as points of red and orange light descending from the darkening sky. Though individually small and cooling during descent, these glowing particles create visual impressions that seem supernatural, violating every assumption about how the physical world functions. The sight of fire falling from heaven appears to validate ancient prophecies about divine wrath, creating interpretation frameworks that impede rational analysis of actual dangers. Children point at falling lights with wonder mixed with fear, while adults struggle to comprehend phenomena that seem to belong in mythological narratives rather than ordinary experience. Some interpret the rain of fire as confirmation that supernatural forces are at work, requiring religious rather than practical responses, while others see evidence that natural processes have exceeded normal bounds in ways that make flight the only rational option. As afternoon progresses, the character of material falling from the eruption column changes in ways signaling escalating danger. The pumice stones become larger and denser, indicating changes in eruption dynamics, suggesting more violent phases approaching. Initially marble-sized, the stones grow to walnut size and larger, while their impact velocity increases enough to cause injury to anyone caught without protection in open areas. Mixed with familiar, light-coloured pumice, darker fragments begin appearing that indicate different conditions within the volcano, materials subjected to higher temperatures and pressures than anything ejected during earlier phases. These dark stones represent magma that has undergone more complete melting and chemical transformation, suggesting the eruption is tapping deeper levels of the magma chamber, where conditions become increasingly violent. Air quality deteriorates steadily as fine ash particles suspended in the atmosphere create conditions that burn the throat and lungs, while reducing visibility throughout the city to distances measured in yards rather than miles. Breathing becomes conscious effort rather than automatic function, with each inhalation requiring attention to avoid choking on volcanic dust that penetrates even tightly woven cloth used as improvised masks. The accumulating volcanic debris creates practical challenges, transforming routine activities into exhausting ordeals. Within hours of initial pumice fall, depths reach several inches throughout Pompeii, making walking difficult and wheeled transport increasingly problematic. The loose stones shift underfoot like ball bearings, making each step uncertain, while their collective weight begins stressing building structures not designed to bear such loads. Roofs throughout the city begin showing signs of strain, as pumice accumulation reaches weights challenging even robust Roman construction. Continuous loading from falling debris creates conditions where structural failures become increasingly likely, especially for buildings with large unsupported spans. Occasional crashes throughout the city signal roof collapses, claiming lives and blocking escape routes. You make the crucial decision to return home immediately, recognizing that conditions will only worsen and that your family's survival depends on rapid action while evacuation routes remain passable. The journey provides stark demonstration of how quickly familiar urban environment can become alien and dangerous when natural forces exceed human control. Most disturbing thing is the change in the city's acoustic environment, as normal urban sounds become muffled by continuous percussion of stones hitting roof tiles, while the distant roar from Vesuvius grows steadily louder and more complex. Conversations become difficult, not only due to competing noise levels, but because unnatural conditions create psychological stress affecting normal social interaction. Arriving home, you find your wife already engaged in efficient preparation for emergency departure. The packing process forces agonizing decisions about which possessions to take and which to abandon forever. Every item must be evaluated for essential utility versus weight and bulk that could slow evacuation during what may prove to be journeys lasting days through increasingly difficult conditions. The psychological difficulty of these choices extends beyond mere attachment to material objects. Possessions being abandoned represent not just economic investment, but emotional connections to family history, personal achievements, and social relationships that give meaning to daily life. Leaving them behind feels like accepting that the familiar world is ending and that whatever follows will require completely different foundations for identity and purpose. As you organize final preparations, sounds from outside grow increasingly ominous. Steady patter of falling pumice is punctuated by occasional crashes as buildings throughout the city succumb to accumulated weight, while distant roar from Vesuvius evolves into complex symphony of destruction, including grinding, cracking, and explosive sounds, suggesting the mountain itself is breaking apart. More disturbing are human sounds beginning to penetrate volcanic noise. Screams from people injured by falling debris, shouts from families calling for missing members, and rising babble of voices as evacuation groups form and dissolve in increasingly chaotic streets. The social fabric that normally maintains urban order is beginning to fray under stress, exceeding normal community coping mechanisms. The evacuation journey through Pompeii's streets provides continuous education in crisis psychology as you observe how different people and families respond to identical threats. Some households demonstrate remarkable organisation and mutual support, moving efficiently towards city gates while helping neighbours and strangers struggling with difficult conditions. Other groups are paralysed by indecision or internal conflicts, preventing effective action while precious time passes. Most tragic are families torn apart by disagreements about appropriate responses to unprecedented danger. Children plead with parents to abandon property and flee, while elderly relatives refuse to leave familiar surroundings. Spouses disagree about risk assessment, with some demanding immediate departure, while others insist remaining indoors offers better protection than dangerous travel through hostile conditions. The journey toward Pompeii's gates reveals the city's transformation from familiar urban environment into alien landscape, where normal navigation techniques no longer function effectively. Streets filled with accumulating pumice lose their distinctive characteristics, while landmarks disappear under uniform grey deposits, making direction finding dependent on memory rather than visual reference points. The human geography of evacuation creates temporary communities of mutual assistance, crossing normal social boundaries in ways impossible under routine circumstances. Wealthy citizens share transportation with poor families, while slaves abandon masters, refusing to evacuate and join groups organised around survival rather than legal obligations. The crisis strips away many social distinctions, creating relationships based on immediate practical cooperation. Your engineering knowledge proves invaluable for helping evacuation groups navigate safely through increasingly dangerous urban terrain. Understanding structural principles allows you to identify buildings likely to collapse and steer people away from areas where accumulated pumice creates maximum roof loading. Knowledge of drainage patterns helps predict where debris will accumulate most heavily. As evening approaches, the evacuation becomes a race against time as conditions deteriorate faster than most people anticipated. Pumice accumulation reaches depths making walking exhausting and wheeled transport impossible, while continuing fall ensures conditions will worsen throughout the night and following day. The psychological atmosphere grows increasingly desperate as people realize their familiar city is being buried around them, and that survival requires abandoning not just possessions, but fundamental assumptions about security and permanence. The crisis forces rapid maturation as individuals confront mortality and make adult decisions about resource allocation and moral obligations under extreme conditions. Your family joins streams of refugees moving through darkening streets, toward gates representing the boundary between familiar surroundings and unknown dangers in countryside beyond. The choice between certain loss of everything, known and uncertain survival in alien conditions becomes the defining decision, determining whether your children have futures or whether your family name disappears from history. The night that follows tests human endurance under conditions exceeding normal physical and psychological coping capacity. The continuous fall of volcanic material creates an environment where survival requires constant attention and physical effort, while psychological stress of confronting unprecedented danger exhausts mental resources needed for rational planning and effective action. Yet thousands of people demonstrate remarkable determination to escape despite deteriorating conditions. Families carry elderly relatives and young children through pumice drifts, sometimes reaching knee-deep levels. Groups of neighbours coordinate movements to provide mutual assistance and emotional support. Even some who initially planned to remain indoors change their minds and join the stream of refugees heading toward higher ground. The eruption column's behaviour throughout the night signals approaching catastrophe for anyone with technical knowledge to interpret warning signs. Instead of maintaining steady upward trajectory, The column begins to pulse and waver, suggesting forces driving it are approaching critical thresholds where gravitational collapse becomes inevitable. As the afternoon progresses beyond the initial Pumice fall, the volcanic bombardment intensifies in ways that reveal the true power building within Vesuvius. The rain of fire becomes more frequent and dramatic. Molten droplets of rock ejected at such high temperatures that they remain incandescent during their descent from the towering eruption column. These glowing projectiles, some as large as pebbles, hiss as they strike stone pavements and wooden roofs, leaving scorch marks that demonstrate temperatures far beyond anything in normal human experience. The optical effects created by this fiery precipitation prove as terrifying as the physical danger. Against the artificially darkened sky, thousands of orange and red points of light trace brilliant arcs as they fall, creating a spectacle that seems to validate every ancient prophecy about the end of the world. The sight triggers primal fears that bypass rational thinking, causing some witnesses to fall to their knees in prayer, while others flee in panic through streets already treacherous with accumulating pumice. But the rain of fire represents only one component of an increasingly complex atmospheric assault. The volcanic column now extends so high that its top disappears beyond the limits of vision, while its base has expanded to cover not just Vesuvius's crater, but much of the mountain's upper slopes. Lightning flashes continuously within this towering mass of superheated gases and particles, creating electrical displays that have no parallel in normal weather patterns. These internal illuminations reveal the column's structure as a roiling, churning mixture of materials moving at velocities that indicate explosive rather than gradual release of underground pressures. The sounds accompanying this visual spectacle evolved throughout the afternoon into an increasingly complex and terrifying acoustic landscape. The initial roar has been joined by sharp cracking sounds that suggest enormous stone formations breaking apart under pressures exceeding their structural limits. Periodic explosive bursts send shockwaves through the atmosphere that can be felt as physical pressure against the body, while grinding noises indicate massive movements of material within the mountain itself. Most unnerving are sounds that seem almost organic, groaning, wheezing, and what could be interpreted as screaming emanating from deep within Vesuvius. These acoustic effects result from gases and steam escaping through complex networks of fissures and caverns. But to terrified witnesses, they suggest that the mountain itself is a living creature in agony, dying in ways that threaten to take the entire region with it. More concerning is the change in atmospheric pressure that sensitive individuals begin to notice as the eruption intensifies. The massive displacement of air by the eruption column creates pressure waves that cause ear pain and disorientation, while also affecting the behavior of animals throughout the region. Dogs refuse to stop barking, horses become increasingly difficult to control, and even insects seem to be fleeing the area in patterns that suggest instinctive recognition of approaching catastrophe. The accumulating pumice creates increasingly dangerous conditions that transform familiar urban geography into alien terrain, requiring constant vigilance to navigate safely. What began as a light dusting of curious stone fragments has evolved into deposits reaching several feet in depth throughout many areas of the city. These accumulations create hidden hazards where familiar streets and sidewalks disappear beneath loose material that shifts unpredictably underfoot, making every step a calculated risk. The weight of accumulated pumice begins causing structural failures throughout Pompeii as buildings designed for normal loading conditions struggle to support the additional mass being deposited on their roofs and terraces. The sounds of collapse become increasingly frequent throughout the afternoon, crashes that signal the destruction of homes, shops, and public buildings that have stood for generations. Each failure sends clouds of dust and debris into air already thick with volcanic particles, while also creating new obstacles that block escape routes and trap residents in increasingly confined areas. Despite the mounting evidence of catastrophic danger, the psychological responses of Pompeii's residents revealed the full complexity of human decision-making under unprecedented stress. People divided broadly into a few patterns of behaviour that now, looking back, feel like a grim experiment in crisis psychology. Some, who remembered earthquakes and floods, recognised the severity of the danger. They gathered families and set out in the afternoon, while escape routes remained clear. Their decisiveness showed how past experience can sharpen perception and speed action. Others admitted that something unusual was happening, but clung to the belief that conditions would soon stabilise. Among them was Lucius, a baker you had known for years, whose bread ovens supplied half the neighbourhood. You had spoken with him while passing his shop, and Lucius insisted that shuttering his doors and waiting inside was safer than abandoning everything he owned. That was the last time you saw him. Prosperity and responsibility bound such people to their homes, and those bonds became their undoing. The largest group remained paralysed, uncertain whether to stay or flee. They filled the streets with endless debates, fixating on small details. The strange colour of the falling pumice, or whether the gods might be sending omens, while ignoring the larger pattern of mortal danger unfolding above them. A smaller, but equally tragic minority treated the worsening crisis as a test of loyalty or courage, refusing to leave even as conditions became unbearable. The social dynamics within these groups create additional layers of complexity as family members, friends, and neighbours attempt to influence each other's decisions while dealing with their own fears and uncertainties. Arguments break out between those advocating evacuation and those insisting on remaining, with each side interpreting the same evidence to support their preferred course of action. These conflicts consume precious time and emotional energy, while also creating social pressures that prevent some individuals from making decisions based purely on rational assessment of available information. As darkness falls, though distinguishing natural nightfall from the artificial twilight created by volcanic debris becomes increasingly difficult, the eruption's character changes in ways that signal approaching climax of the disaster. The towering column that has been rising steadily throughout the day begins to show signs of instability, pulsing and wavering as internal pressures reach critical thresholds, where the forces driving material upward can no longer sustain such massive ejection into the stratosphere. The visual changes in the eruption column prove as ominous as they are spectacular. What had been a relatively steady vertical rise of material now becomes erratic, with periodic contractions followed by explosive expansions that send shockwaves throughout the region. The internal lightning displays become more frequent and intense, creating strobe-like effects that illuminate the surrounding landscape in brief, terrifying glimpses that reveal the full extent of the transformation occurring throughout the region. But it's the acoustic changes that provide the clearest warnings of approaching catastrophe for anyone with knowledge to interpret them. The steady roar that has provided the background soundtrack to the day's events evolves into something far more complex and threatening, a symphony of destruction that includes elements no human has ever heard before. Deep resonant tones suggest caverns and chambers within the mountain collapsing as their structural supports are destroyed by heat and pressure. Sharp explosive cracks indicate the failure of massive rock formations that have contained underground forces for centuries. Most disturbing are the new sounds that begin around midnight, rhythmic pulsing noises that seem to come from the very heart of the mountain, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature approaching the moment of death. These acoustic effects result from pressure waves generated by the periodic collapse and reformation of internal structures within the magma chamber. But to terrified listeners, they suggest that forces beyond human comprehension are preparing for final catastrophic release. The continuing fall of volcanic material throughout the night creates conditions that test human endurance to its limits, while also providing additional time for those still capable of evacuation to make life-saving decisions. The pumice accumulation reaches depths that make movement through the city increasingly difficult and dangerous, while the larger fragments, now mixed with the smaller stones, create genuine hazards for anyone caught without adequate protection. On one street, a family attempts to push a handcart laden with bedding and food toward the city gates. Each wheel sinks into the pumice as though into snow, forcing them to stop every few steps and dig it free. The children stumble in the shifting ground, crying from exhaustion, while the mother shields them with a cloak against the falling stones. Their progress slows to a crawl, and before long they abandon the cart altogether, leaving behind possessions they had thought essential only hours earlier. More significantly, the character of the falling material continues to evolve in ways that indicate escalating violence within the volcanic system. Alongside the familiar light-coloured pumice, increasing quantities of darker, denser fragments suggest that the eruption is tapping deeper levels of the magma chamber, where temperatures and pressures exceed anything experienced during the day's earlier phases. These darker stones represent material that has undergone more complete melting and violent ejection, providing warning signs that conditions within Vesuvius are approaching truly catastrophic levels. The psychological toll of enduring such conditions throughout the dark hours proves as challenging as the physical dangers. The combination of continuous noise, falling debris, choking air quality, and the complete transformation of familiar surroundings into alien landscapes creates sensory overload that overwhelms normal coping mechanisms. Many people experience panic attacks, disorientation, and other stress responses that impair their ability to make rational decisions about protective actions. Yet thousands of residents demonstrate remarkable courage and determination throughout the night, continuing evacuation efforts despite conditions that would challenge the strongest individuals. Families with young children and elderly relatives maintain their movements towards safety through accumulating debris that reaches knee-deep levels in many areas. Groups of neighbours coordinate their activities to provide mutual assistance, sharing resources and supporting those who struggle with the physical demands of movement through increasingly hostile terrain. You, though focused on protecting your own family, still find opportunities to help others. Alongside a well-known gladiator of the city, only days earlier feared for his ferocity in the arena, you guide a group of elderly residents left behind by younger relatives. The unlikely partnership proves vital. His strength clears paths through Pumice, while your knowledge of the streets directs the way. Together, you manage to attach the bewildered elders to a larger band of refugees, who promise to care for them as the column pushes onward through the chaos. Around 6:30 on the morning of August 25th, the eruption reaches its deadliest phase when the towering column that has been rising from Vesuvius for 18 hours finally collapses under its own weight. The physical laws governing such massive displacement of material into the atmosphere demand that this equilibrium between upward momentum and gravitational forces must eventually fail, and when it does, the results exceed every previous expression of volcanic violence in recorded history. The collapse occurs not as a single event, but as a series of catastrophic failures that create multiple pyroclastic flows racing down the mountain slopes at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. These flows represent the ultimate expression of geological fury, avalanches of superheated gas and pulverized rock, moving with kinetic energy that obliterates everything encountered while extending destruction far beyond areas that seem safely distant from the volcano itself. The first flow follows the path of least resistance toward Herculaneum, the elegant resort town built practically at Vesuvius's base. The superheated mixture of gases and debris, heated to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius, moves faster than any living thing can flee, while carrying enough thermal energy to incinerate organic material instantly upon contact. The town's destruction occurs in minutes, with buildings collapsing under the impact force, while everything combustible simply vanishes in the superheated atmosphere of the advancing flow. You remember the days you spent in Herculaneum, inspecting fountains in shaded courtyards, and checking the conduits that carried spring water into seaside villas. The town always struck you as quieter and more refined than Pompeii, its painted walls brighter, its marble pools shimmering with the bay's reflected light. You realize now you will never see its terraces or gardens again, never greet the families who once welcomed you into their homes while you worked. All of it disappears in the space of a single breath. But Herculaneum's fate represents only the beginning of the mountain's final assault on human civilization. Additional pyroclastic flows follow different paths down Vesuvius's slopes, each one extending a zone of total annihilation, while demonstrating that the eruption's violence operates according to no pattern that human experience can predict or prepare for. Some flows follow valleys and low-lying areas, as expected, but others surmount ridges and hills that seem to offer protection, creating destruction zones that encompass entire landscapes rather than just narrow channels. The flow that strikes Pompeii arrives with such speed that most residents have no opportunity to understand what is killing them, much less take protective action. The superheated avalanche surges through the city's streets like a liquid, filling every open space while generating temperatures that kill instantly through heat exposure alone, even before the crushing weight of debris buries everything beneath meters of volcanic deposits. Buildings that survived 18 hours of pumice accumulation simply disappear beneath the advancing wall of destruction, while the accumulated pumice that had seemed like the disaster's primary threat proves to be merely a preliminary phase of violence that has no precedent in human experience. The pyroclastic flows demonstrate volcanic processes operating on scales that dwarf human comprehension. The volumes of material exceed the contents of entire mountains, while the speeds achieved suggest forces comparable to explosive weapons, but sustained over periods lasting many minutes. The temperatures generated approach those found in industrial furnaces, while the toxic gases create atmospheric conditions that would be lethal even without the crushing physical impact of the solid debris. From your position of relative safety, several miles from Pompeii, you witness the complete obliteration of the world you've known and worked within for your entire adult life. The pyroclastic flow that engulfs the city appears from a distance as a grey cloud that moves with impossible speed across the landscape, erasing familiar landmarks and replacing them with uniform deposits that bear no resemblance to the thriving urban environment that existed just moments before. The human cost of this climactic violence defies both emotional comprehension and mathematical calculation. The approximately 2,000 people who remained in Pompeii, whether through choice, circumstance, or simple inability to evacuate in time, die in ways that preserve their final moments for future archaeological discovery, while serving as permanent testimony to the consequences of underestimating natural forces that operate beyond human control or prediction. But the flow's impact extends far beyond immediate casualties to encompass complete transformation of the regional landscape. Agricultural areas that had sustained human populations for centuries disappear beneath volcanic deposits that will require decades or centuries to weather into productive soil. The economic infrastructure that made this region one of the empire's most prosperous, the ports, roads, aqueducts, and commercial networks, suffers damage that will reshape settlement patterns and trade relationships throughout the Mediterranean world. The scale of destruction overwhelms normal human psychological processes for dealing with trauma and loss. Individual deaths, however tragic, can be mourned and eventually incorporated into continuing life. But the simultaneous annihilation of entire communities, along with the physical landscapes that supported them, creates forms of grief that challenge the mind's ability to process experience while maintaining psychological coherence and hope for the future. The Vesuvius eruption of 79 AD stands as a turning point in how humans record and interpret natural disasters. It produced the first detailed eyewitness documentation of a truly explosive, column-forming eruption and, paradoxically, an unparalleled archaeological preservation that froze daily life in astonishing detail. Together, written testimonies and buried streets created a corpus of evidence that would shape scientific thinking, emergency practice, cultural imagination, and urban policy for centuries to come. Pliny the Younger's letters are central to that legacy. A Roman lawyer, senator, and later governor of Bithynia, he was just 17 years old during the eruption, observing events from Misenum across the Bay of Naples. His account describes the actions of his uncle, Pliny the Elder, a renowned naturalist, author, and naval commander who sailed toward Vesuvius in an attempt to rescue friends and study the eruption firsthand. Pliny the Younger's careful, descriptive reporting established an early model of systematic eyewitness observation. His image of the eruption column, the pine tree, or pylon silhouette, became a foundational observation for volcanology. Modern scientists named this style of explosive event Plinian in his honor. His narrative also records human responses, dilemmas, and errors, giving later scholars rare material for studying both physical processes and social behavior under extreme stress. Archaeology complemented those letters by supplying the physical record. Pompeii and Herculaneum preserve shop counters with amphorae still in place, ovens with loaves frozen by haste, frescoed houses, and streets choked with pumice. The plaster casts of victims, made by filling the voids left by decomposed bodies, turn abstract mortality into intimate, visceral testimony, faces, postures, even cloth folds. These remains are both scientific data and moral evidence, forcing later generations to confront the human cost of misreading or ignoring natural hazard signs. Scientifically, the 79 AD event provided a rare opportunity to correlate narrative and deposit. Layers of pumice, lapilli, and welded pyroclastic material map the eruption's phases in space and time. Deposits' grain sizes, thicknesses, and chemical signatures allow modern volcanologists to reconstruct wind patterns, eruption column height, and the triggers of column collapse. From these correlations came insights into eruption dynamics, ash dispersal, and the lethal potency of pyroclastic flows, knowledge now central to hazard assessment at explosive volcanoes worldwide. The human side of the record is equally instructive for emergency management. Pompeii's 18-hour window between the eruption's onset and the climactic pyroclastic destruction demonstrates that timely recognition and decisive action can enable large-scale survival. Yet the same evidence also shows how cognitive traps, normalcy bias, social conformity, risk-minimizing reasoning delay action. Pliny's letters and archaeological snapshots together illustrate how ordinary routines, economic incentives, and administrative caution can conspire to turn a survivable event into catastrophe. Modern disaster planners still wrestle with those psychological patterns when issuing warnings and designing evacuation protocols. Practical lessons followed. Urban planners and engineers drew slow, uneven lessons from Vesuvius. The need to plan evacuation routes, to provide redundancy in critical infrastructure, and to account for unusual loads on structures. Building practices in some regions began to reflect the requirement to bear ash loading and resist seismic shaking. Engineers designing water, transport, and storage systems increasingly considered failure modes. A single-point collapse of supply can quickly cascade into humanitarian crises. Although implementation varied with resources and politics, the eruption seeded an awareness that technological sophistication can both create resilience and compound vulnerability. The eruption's economic effects underline that point. The destruction of two productive cities and surrounding farmland disrupted trade networks, across the Mediterranean. Warehouses, merchant credit, and specialty agricultural output, prized wines and oils, vanished overnight, forcing merchants and consumers to reconfigure supply chains. The loss propagated through markets and settlements. Refugee flows redistributed labour and skills, while insurers and lenders faced enormous concentrated claims that tested Rome's fiscal mechanisms. The event thus became an early demonstration of how localised environmental shocks generate wide-reaching economic ripple effects. Demographic and social consequences were profound too. Many survivors dispersed across Italy and the empire, including you and your family, carrying trauma and experience into new communities. Some settlements began to avoid hazardous sites that formerly seemed attractive. In refugee camps and later resettlements, social hierarchies sometimes dissolved under pressure and sometimes reasserted themselves, revealing both the fragility and adaptability of social institutions. These human movements and their cultural aftereffects changed local politics, labour markets, and collective memory for generations. Cultural and intellectual reactions varied widely. Some Romans invoked divine punishment and moral narratives. Emerging Christian voices framed the catastrophe as portentous. Natural philosophers sought mechanical explanations in subterranean fires and winds. The event fed poetry, painting, and rhetoric. Artists and writers used Vesuvius as a symbol of fate, human hubris, and the limits of control. Philosophically, it invigorated schools that emphasized human limitation and acceptance of nature's necessity, such as certain Stoic threads, while encouraging more empirical inquiry into physical causes. Institutionally, the Roman response, including Emperor Titus's direct involvement in relief, showed both capacity and limits. Imperial resources could muster food, shelter, and administrative support, but the scale and novelty of the catastrophe outstripped routine bureaucratic responses. The attempt to compensate victims, provide temporary housing, and reassign resources became an early example of state-level disaster management, illustrating how political structures are tested and sometimes adapt in the aftermath of extreme events. Perhaps the longest-lasting legacy is methodological. Vesuvius encouraged systematic observation, record-keeping, and correlating human reports with physical evidence. That dual approach, marrying narrative and stratigraphy, is a cornerstone of modern volcanology and disaster science. Today's monitoring networks, seismometers, gas analyzers, ground deformation sensors, and evacuation models build on principles derived from case studies like 79 AD, look for precursors, quantify uncertainty, communicate clearly, and plan logistics before a crisis closes options. Finally, the Vesuvius catastrophe offers perennial moral and practical lessons. It shows that technological and economic achievement can create complacency and new vulnerabilities, and that the capacity to survive often depends on social conditions and timely decision-making as much as on technical skill. The survivors of 79 AD lived with the cost and the knowledge that early recognition and action matter, a lesson resonant for modern societies where millions live in the shadow of active volcanoes, from Naples to Indonesia and beyond. And you know this truth better than anyone. Though you managed to begin a new life in Capua, the thriving city on the Campanian plain, the memories of Pompeii and of that terrible day never left you. Every fountain you repaired, every aqueduct you inspected in later years carried echoes of the silence that fell over the Bay of Naples after the eruption. The catastrophe shaped not only your fate, but also your way of seeing the world. You learned that engineering skill could sustain cities only as long as nature allowed, and that survival was as much about awareness and solidarity as it was about stone and mortar. That lesson, etched into your memory as deeply as the lava that buried your home, became the compass guiding the rest of your days. The story of Pompeii is therefore both a cautionary tale and a foundation for progress. Caution about human tendency to normalize danger, and foundation because its records have helped build disciplines, policies, and capacities that save lives today. The disaster transformed how people interpret nature and govern public risk, turning a local catastrophe into a long-term global lesson about resilience, responsibility, and the interplay between human ambition and geological power. Thank you for walking with me through those 18 transformative hours when paradise became hell, when routine became a desperate race against geological time, and when the most advanced urban civilization of the ancient world learned that human achievement, however magnificent, remains forever subject to natural forces that can emerge without warning from the very ground supporting our daily lives. Until our next journey into the past, may you find peace tonight, and may wisdom and courage guide you in all the days to come.